Welcome to MOBE Mondays. We're here for a treat to talk about protecting the vote with our host, Pat Prescott. Pat Prescott is an on-air personality at 94.7 The Wave in Los Angeles. She handles duties as the host of the social justice show, Justice Now. And now, protecting the vote.
This very important conversation. We have some incredibly active people who have been working in our communities, working together to try to protect our vote. First of all, Evan Malbrough. Not too long ago, Evan was an honors graduate at Georgia State University, but since then he has already made a name for himself for founding the Georgia Poll Youth Worker Initiative, in addition to being the founding coordinator of the Georgia Civic Campus Network. And this work is not new for Evan. He is also a founding member of Vote Everywhere GSU, a group that organized the first ever student-run polling location in the state of Georgia. And we'll hear from Evan in just a moment. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Evan. Eric Cohen spent over 25 years as a marketer for Fortune 500 companies. He managed talent and he consulted startups, intellectual properties, and ad agencies. And then in 2007, he started and ran a childhood obesity nonprofit called In Play, partnering with the Healthier Schools Challenge. Currently, Eric oversees anti-counterfeiting for brands on the Amazon platform, but his passion project is Voting Rights Are Civil Rights. It's an initiative to stop voter suppression and to move closer to the true equality of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, what it was intended to ensure. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Eric. We also have with us Stephanie Owens. Stephanie lobbies federal, state, and local officials to develop policies that improve communities and help people to live their best lives. She served as an appointee of both President Barack Obama and President Bill Clinton, and she designed innovative tactics for the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. She is nationally known for building critical cross-sector alliances to influence government and corporate policies to enrich communities. And currently, Stephanie is the National Grassroots Voter Protection Project Manager for the NAACP. Welcome, Stephanie Owens. Thank you for being with us this evening. Okay, what we're going to do here this afternoon is we want to talk about how to protect your vote. We know a lot of you are really worried. If I drop it in a drop box, is that going to work? Can I trust the post office? A lot of us are very skeptical about the options that are available to us. But we're going to talk about what to expect on Election Day and some of the efforts that these three individuals and their initiatives are doing to help to protect our vote. I want to just mention up front that Evan has another engagement. So we are going to hear from him first. I'm going to start asking him questions first after everybody tells us a little bit about their particular organization. But if you have questions that are specific to Evan, we're going to ask that you go ahead and put them in the chat as soon as you can so we can make sure that he gets a chance to respond to all of those. All right, so we will start with Stephanie. Stephanie, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and where you at right now as we head to the election.
Good evening, Pat, and thank you so much for having me this evening. So my focus is really to make sure that everyone who wants to vote can. And my biggest focus at the NAACP is to stand up a poll monitoring program where we can protect our people at the polls. It's really important that voters get the assistance that they need to be able to cast their ballot. And that's the work that we're doing. We're training anyone who wants to be a poll monitor on how to assist voters, as well as a few strategies around de-escalation, because we expect some foolishness out there. So That's the work that we're doing right now.
Yeah, and I know you guys are super busy right now because we're getting very, very close. Eric, tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing. I think we need to unmute Eric.
Okay, am I unmuted now? Okay, thank you very much for having me, Pat. I'm very, very excited to be here. So I am working very similar to Stephanie on what I refer to as a three-headed monster. And what this is making sure that people are properly trained to be out at the polls and protect the people on the lines. make sure that we get the poll tapes at the end of the night. And poll tapes are, I like to explain them as a receipt of everything that's happened of the days. So there's no shenanigans that can go on in the counting back in the county offices or via hacking. And then the third thing that we have been working on is pulling together a whole group of organizations to work together on these initiatives so we can use the data we have to sort of disperse people in as many places as possible, and no one's bumping into each other.
Yeah, one of the things that's been really encouraging to me in seeing this and the past MOBE Monday conversation we did as well is how great you guys are working together. Everybody knows each other and everybody's coordinating those efforts. And Evan, I know you're part of that as well. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to engage young voters in working the polls.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, especially with great leaders and mentors in this field. So as my introduction says, my name is Evan Malbrough. I am a proud graduate of the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies, and I am the founder of the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project. What our project is, we recruit young people in the state of Georgia to become poll workers. And poll workers are the people you see when you walk into your precinct that help make your ballot. They're not full-time election staff. They are members of your community who have been stepping up to work the polls, many of which have been working the polls for decades. But due to COVID-19, the virus had discouraged many poll workers who before this year averaged at age 60 from working the polls this year. So what my org is doing is we are trying to change the face of your precinct. So we want people in Georgia to walk into their precinct and see a wave of young people. And we are proud to say that since our founding on July 1st, we have recruited over 1,000 young people to become poll workers in the Metro Atlanta area, which is the equivalent to fully staffing 100 precincts.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. Well, I'm going to start with you. I'm interested in what inspired you to do this. And I know you were doing this kind of work, right out of school. When did you graduate?
I graduated in May of 2020.
So you just got out of school and you are contributing this much art. What has inspired you to do this work?
Well, a lot of things, right? Of course, I go to a school named after Andrew Young, so the expectation's already high. Also, my school was actually located in Congressman John Lewis's district, right? So I literally worked in the shadow of his office. But what really inspired me to start the project was my first job out of college was working the June 9th election, right? So I worked the polls, both early voting and on election day, and I saw the need for young people, and I saw that it was really high, right? I was the youngest in my precinct. I actually brought a friend with me to work as well. So we shared the title of youngest in our precinct, and we helped the precinct stay open figuratively and literally, right? One day I had to run a precinct on a Wi-Fi hotspot on my phone. And that's the only way people got to vote that day, right? So it's things like that. And when I saw how bad it was on June 9th, I realized that there needs to be more young people like me who intuitively get the technology to be working the polls. So that's why I started the project. I also started the project because poll workers are paid. So, just going to say it flat out, when I left college, right, because I didn't get to officially graduate or have my ceremony because of COVID, I lost job offers, right? I had a whole, plan played out and said I was going to go to law school. I was going to do all that. But then COVID kind of put those things on hold. So then when the county called me, my only source of income was democracy, right? And it was a great source of income, I will say, right? So it really, and I know there's a lot of students like me. I have students now who are poll working to pay their bills, right? So it's serving as a great economic and jobs program. So, what we say is we give students who need work to a democracy that needs workers.
For everybody who is really just frustrated by this pandemic, I'm sure when you think about it, you can find different things that are kind of like little surprise benefits we didn't think of. And one of them certainly is this, that a lot of those poll workers that you talked about, the over 60 group, will not be participating. So it almost, just like it has forced us to do this kind of thing and to do all the Zoom meetings and everything, it has forced us to really bring young people into that equation. So from your vantage point, I'm interested in what you see. What is it that America's young people want? And how do they view our current political situation that's happening right
I think what we're seeing is disillusion, right? Like if you take into the fact, I was born in 1997, right? So I was born right before the turn of the century during the Olympics. I was actually kind of like an Olympic baby. Um, so I was born during that time. So if you look at many of us, we grew up during the 2008 economic crisis, right? And a lot of us are graduating high school and college in the COVID-19 economic crisis. So you're already talking to a generation that has faced two major economic crises before before we're even 25, right? So that's a very big deal. So I think what we're trying to see is we're trying to get like a lifeline at this point, right? We're trying to find candidates who are talking to us. And also, we're a generation that was fully immersed in the predatory nature of student loans, right? So we're looking for help on those. We're looking for help. Like, there are people out there with houses worth of student loans that need repayment, but that they cannot possibly repay probably in their lifetime. And then something that's, as we see in the news, police reform, right? My generation wants to renegotiate our contract with policing, and we want candidates that are going to bring everybody to the table. So those are just three things that we want. We want economic reform that actually gives us a future. We want fundamental reform in our education system. And we want to redo that contract with the people who have sworn to protect and serve us. Oh, Pat, you muted.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. You've already recruited 1,000 young people to work the polls in Atlanta. How engaged are you finding them in this election cycle, and the whole process? Was it hard to get that 1,000 people?
Honestly, no. We did Instagram. A lot of people are very interested in being poll workers. Going back to the fact they found out it was paid and everybody needs money, right? So a lot of people were very interested. And we don't just hire poll workers in the precinct, right? We've hired election technicians. So in the state of Georgia, some of your machines are probably built and worked on by people my age, right? And programmed by people my age. We also, for example, we're actually working with the New Georgia Project to establish basically a rapid response team of multilingual young people to serve Gwinnett County, which has one of the highest Latinx populations in the country, right? We actually just got funding for that today so that we can help voters who don't speak English as a first language get the resources they need so that they can understand what's on their ballot, right? So we've also been able to hire students as poll worker instructors to assist with the classes that actually teach poll workers the curriculum they need to administer a free and fair election. So we've had a very diverse group of students who want to do a myriad of work. And it's been really great because I personally believe that it's very healthy for the election system. So with all those factors, it's been amazing the response we've seen. We've gotten students as young as 16 years old signing up, right? We got students to have their parents sign up to come work with them. So you'll see entire families in precincts. And it's very humbling to see students who won't be able to vote in this election and probably won't be able to vote until the 2022 midterm, actually stepping up to work 13 hours in the precincts for others, right? So it lets me have faith that our democracy isn't done for. And it's been very a great response, a very good response.
Well, it certainly is great to have you on the front lines helping to recruit people. Do you think that young people really, do you think there's the importance of moving forward what we have to do after this is all done, after this election, regardless of the outcome. There's a great deal of work that has to be done from all of your organizations. Do young people realize that?
Yes, I think young people, we're realizing that more, right? I think it's always good. It's not good to be completely unfaithful in the institutions that govern your society, but I do think a little bit of distrust is healthy, right? And the ability to keep the pressure on. And I think that's what our generation is doing. I think our generation is getting more educated when it comes to the people that work with us. We're getting more educated on the issues, and we're very fervent in our want and our pretty much need to tackle these issues from an educated way. You know, working in this field, I've seen young people just do insane things when it comes to organizing and building. You know, I started working in the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Andrew Goodman, he was a voting rights activist in Mississippi. No, I'm sorry. He was from New York, but he went to Mississippi during the Freedom Summer movement with James Chaney and Michael Swarner, and they ended up losing their lives registering to vote. And now I know friends that are going to Kentucky. I know friends that are going all over the South to fight for police reform, to register people to vote, right? So what we're seeing is a resurgence in the age of young people coming back and taking their power and fighting for what's right. And I think that's going to continue. I don't think it's going to stop just because the election's over. And honestly, even if no matter who wins, whether it be Biden or Trump, I actually think it's going to accelerate, right? Because then, after that inauguration, that's when policies are going to start being written. That's when policies are going to go to the forefront. And that's going to be our time to make sure our voices are heard, especially with any fresh election officials that are going to be in office come January 21st.
Yeah, that's the vote is coming up, but it certainly is not over when that happens. I mean, this is the beginning of a new era of possibility, really, for all of us if we become engaged. But there's some people who are not engaged. What do you say to a young person who says my vote doesn't matter? I'm not inspired by either one of those candidates. This is not important. I got to go see what's on Instagram right now. What do you say to those people?
I would say a vote is an investment, right? It's not just an investment in the candidate. It's an investment in your community. And you have to grow your investment. So I would say, I think the reason why you see a lot of disillusion when it comes to voting is because we've kind of convinced ourselves that voting is just that. Like voting is the end all be all, right? You'll fix society by voting. So what I tell people is, I'm fine with you protesting every day. Just take 2 hours off from protesting on November 3rd and go vote, or take 2 or 3 hours from protesting to go early vote, right? So I think that's the message I give. It's just that voting isn't it. You have to do more things. And then when you do more things, you start seeing the changes you want. But that vote is just a tool in the toolbox of social change.
Yeah, so I've just got one more question for you. And if you have a question for Evan, please send it to us right now. We can ask those to him before. We want you to stay around as long as you can, Evan, but just in case, we want people to be able to ask you questions about anything that they have to ask right now. You mentioned technology. I think that's such a critical part of what we're into moving forward. And what a great opportunity this is for, it's just like a lot of the grandparents who are with us today. When something goes wrong technologically, we call our grandkids. And so I think that having you guys involved in this is going to be really good. Talk about the technology that's becoming more and more involved in these kind of processes.
Absolutely. Many states now are using touchscreens to create and cast their ballots, right? For example, in the state of Georgia, a voter signs their ballot certificate on a touchscreen, and then they actually go to mark and print their ballot on a touchscreen as well. So basically, you're going from a system that was either paper or pinned on the screen answering to a fully touchscreen system, right? So it's definitely a big change, and it's also that's why I say the need for intuitiveness, right? Because if you look at the user experiences or the user interfaces of these machines, they're all pretty similar, right? It's the same idea, just with different molds and skins on them, right? So that's why I think young people play a pivotal role, because what may take an older person who may be 65, what may take them 15 minutes to identify a problem or to assess a situation, it could take that younger person 2 minutes because they grew up with that technology, right? Just an anecdote, I teach poll worker classes in the state of Georgia, right? So
Mhm.
3 times a week and 2 times on Saturdays, I go and teach people how to be poll workers. And a large quantity of my workers are older, right? So, it is a big learning curve, right? Because they didn't grow up with the technology we're using, right? Something as simple as like I have my iPad, this is an iPad. This is what people sign their voter certificates on in the state of Georgia, right? You're talking to a person who's never seen an iPad before in their life, and you're expecting them to handle 750 to 1,000 voters in a day on that iPad, right? So it's definitely a huge learning curve, and that's why we need young people to assist, because if something goes wrong and something happens, it might be hard for that older person to realize that there's an issue, and that's where we as young people help support our elders in making sure that elections go off without a hitch.
Before I go on with questions for Stephanie and Eric, I just wanted to something we were talking about before we started, which is the fact that so many people are really nervous about the mail-in ballots. Do I send them to the post office? Do I put them in the drop boxes? And I would love for all of you to address just what you're thinking about those things. We were talking about some of this before we started, and we'll start with you, Stephanie.
I think it's important to have some trust in the system. And so, to the extent that you have a mail ballot and you have plenty of time to put that ballot in the mail, there is reason to believe that the US Postal Service will be able to deliver that ballot. However, if we really want to be sure, then it's really important to be able to drop that ballot off at the office of your election officials. But I think that people have done a very good job of creating fear in a variety of ways as a means to suppress the vote. And so, certainly, the fear that has been caused around the post office is alarming for many. But for sure, with the number of mail in ballots that have been cast across the nation, it is very clear that those ballots are making it to their destinations. But there's no reason that you can't be sure and take that initiative and drop your ballot off at the election official's office.
Eric?
Um, Quite frankly, Stephanie pretty much nailed it. The best way is at the election official's office. Me personally, I would say after that, put it in a Dropbox because you've put it in there. And then if you are comfortable, yes, use the United States Post Office. That being said, to use the wording of President Obama, we've never had a situation where someone's tried to kneecap the United States Postal Service before. And I think I would say try and do what makes you most comfortable. But if you have a concern, bring it to the commissioner's office or the Dropbox, or in some places, you can bring it to the early voting site and give it to them there, or even in some states, deliver it on election day. But you have to know what the laws are about that in your state if that's your plan on election day.
And that brings up
And
an
I would,
important point that we were talking about too, about really being able to check out what the regulations are in your particular state.
yes,
Stephanie, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's also important to track it. So
Yes.
almost all election officials have a process that allow you to go online and track the status of your ballot, whether it's been received, whether it's been processed, whether it's been counted. So the voter is going to be the eyewitness to their own democracy in 2020. The voter is the activist in this story. And everyone has to know the things that they can do so that they are protecting the one vote that makes all the difference in the world, and that's theirs. So you can track your ballots.
Evan, any advice for people dropping off their ballots?
Yes, I would just echo what my other two colleagues were saying. The more secure, the better, right? So the more information you have on the status and the location of the ballot, the better. So I would say pick ways that find the best intersection between convenience and ability for you and security when it comes to making sure your ballot is counted.
Okay, so I have some questions for Eric. Eric, what has been happening at the polls thus far, and how is CSA going to combat some of the issues that we're seeing?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Let me address what CSA is. Most people are used to calling the 1-866-HOUR vote phone number. What CSA is, it's the digital version of that in real time. So if you click on the link to it, or you just go to the website, you're able to put in exactly what's happening, same as you would any other application or document. And you can put pictures in on it, you can put video in on it. And what happens is it goes on into a call center, and the call center vets it. If there's very heavy voter intimidation or something that needs to go to the attorneys, it gets shot to Common Cause or the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights. It also then goes up onto the website, the map. There's a map called, CSA map, CSA2020map.com. And it's also put out on Twitter. Now, what's been happening at the polls as far has been disconcerting in certain ways. We're starting to see for the very first time today, someone in Orange County showed up with a semi-automatic weapon. And that's scary, since it's, you're not supposed to be doing that in Florida at the polls. We're also seeing people showing up trying to intimidate voters. Everything from yelling at them, holding signs, getting too close to them on the lines and sort of looking at them and trying to I don't even know what you can call it, read whether or not they think they're legal. I've seen one case of a sheriff basically making people on the Democratic side of town drive 5 miles out of their way by blocking the roads off to go through the Republican side of town. And then there's a lot of the basic ballot issues that you find, machine issues. So what we need to do, and this is very, very important, is people need to report these things and get the information out as quickly as possible. And now you can do it in a way where you don't have to worry about getting involved, quote unquote. And I think what you're going to find, and this is what Stephanie was talking about before, is there are going to be organizations, like the NAACP and, the people I'm working with and other organizations that are going to be out there to help you if you're being intimidated, if you're being threatened, if people are telling you you're not allowed to vote, people that are going to use the app. So there will be strength in numbers, but I'm not going to lie, it's going to get worse. And you need to be prepared to be smart when you go to the polls. And the best thing you can do is vote early. Do not for election day.
Yeah, we'll come back to some of that, but we want you to know CSA2020.com. Make a note of that website, and this is where you will report any irregularities that you see. Send in the video, the pictures, comments, whatever you have. Evan is going to have to leave us, but we'd like to have him make a quick closing statement before he's done.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. I'm sorry you have to leave. I had a prior engagement before I was invited here, but I would like to say, we're going to need poll workers after the November 3rd election. right? We can't just come up when it's needed and when there's a huge issue and then leave our precincts to the older folks that we've been leaving our precincts to for years, right? For years, election officials have been saying we have a problem recruiting poll workers. We always need poll workers, right? And poll workers directly correlate with the number of precincts and how fast quickly can be served, right? So when when you see on the news, oh, the line is 4 hour wait times or the line is 4 hours long, just know that if you got 10 of your friends to come and talk to the county and try to open a precinct in your community, you could possibly cut that line in half, right? It only takes 10 people to run a precinct after they're trained, right? Just 10. So imagine what if you could get 100 people in your community to do when it comes to signing up as poll workers and expanding access to precincts. Also, if you're a business owner and you own a building or something like that, or a church or a community center or a senior citizens home, just know that your building has the potential to be a precinct, right? Because it's not just getting poll workers, it's getting people to sign up to be precincts. So please, 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 I would implore all of you guys on the call to please be more engaged, be more cognizant, and let's not just vote, right? Let's actually ensure democracy for ourselves and our community. But that's my piece.
Thank you so much, Evan. And I got to tell you, on behalf of all of us, we thank you for your efforts in our community. We thank you for bringing on the next generation of activists. And you keep it up and let us know what we can do to help make everything happen for you. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. We don't have to do this again where I can give a full panel. But thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you've done a great job so far. Thank you, Evan Wayne Malbrough. Thank you for being here. All right, I got a question for Stephanie now. Stephanie, one of the things that I'm learning, I think I mentioned to you, we're doing at the Wave a continuing series called Justice Now, where we examine different aspects of systemic racism. And I'm understanding that a big part of it, not just for our allies, but for ourselves as well, is to be able to articulate the whole historical context of this. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how we end up at this moment that we're at right now.
Sure. It's important for us to think back on the importance of that 1965 Voting Rights Act, because while we had the right to vote, we didn't actually have the right to vote. And so the fact that we had to enact laws to actually give us the implementation of rights we already had is absurd at best. And yet in 2013, the Voting Rights Act was weakened by taking out a very specific section that was put there purposefully to avoid the kinds of voter intimidation that we see right now. As a matter of fact, that law was enacted in 2013, and between 2013 and 2016, 16 million people were purged from the voter rolls. 16 million people were purged. And that was a ruling by the Supreme Court. So all of the challenges that we are facing today were not just created as a nexus from this current administration. There is some systemic problems that we still have to address that are specifically in the law. Fast forward to today, however, how that's going to play out at the polls. We have some idea based on what we've seen, but what that really says to us is when this is over, restoring the Voting Rights Act and moving forward with the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration legislation is incredibly important. Yes. And that ties to our ability to report what we're seeing. So it ties to Say 2020. It ties to calling 1-800-OUR-VOTE. So if anyone is observing anything, you may think it's small. and insignificant, but let us know about it, because those small issues are the ones that become trends that the attorneys then understand. We probably need to litigate about this, or at least there's some policy advocacy that should be taking place in real time to try to fix the issue. So again, the voter as the eyewitness on democracy during this election is incredibly important. But we both have history working against us, recent changes to the Voting Rights Act, and then the repercussions of those who their ears perked up when they heard that dog whistle and invited them to not be best, but to be bad.
Yeah. Let's look at the voting machine issues again, Eric. I want you to talk a little bit about Benny Smith and fraction magic for us.
Okay. Benny Smith is my partner in voting rights or civilrights.com, but Benny is so much more than that. He is the election commissioner in Shelby County, of all places, due to, the Shelby versus Holder decision that Stephanie referenced before. And in 2015, Benny found some anomalies between the poll tapes and the numbers that were reported by the county. And what I mean is, at the end of the night on a poll tape, you will find X number of people voted, Y number of people voted for candidate A, Z number of people voted for candidate B. Okay. Benny, who's a programmer by trade, found that there was a discrepancy in Memphis, which is majority African American, and it was about, I don't know, 200 or something, from one precinct, 200 and something votes less. When he went back and tabulated and did all the, ran the program he'd created, what he found was the African American votes were tabulated at 2/3 of what the white person's votes were. So essentially, we're back at the 3/5 compromise. And this is this goes to a much larger issue. The voting machine industry is only a $300 million machine industry. Okay. The biggest company, which seems to be primarily in African American communities, is ES&S. And the history of them is, in terms of race and problems in African American areas, to say it's not good is being kind. In fact, Stacey Abrams put out a 40-page report of just clips and links over the past 20 years of problems that ES&S has had in terms of corruption, racial issues, etc. And there's zero transparency. And since the lawmakers don't understand it, since the local election officials will get, quote unquote, bribed, legally bribed, this needs to be fixed. And that's why one of the things that I'm working on after this election with Benny and a whole host of people is we are going to put together a very large coalition, and we're going to go after the lawmakers to fix this industry and make sure it's transparent and take the power away from these voting machine companies, who, by the way, are all owned by white private equity. Almost every single company that the private equity companies own are white, and almost all of the board of directors on every single company, as well as the private equity company's board of directors, are white. And I know that because I personally did the research. So that's not hearsay. That's firsthand me going through the data.
And this is something that the average person, I mean, we don't even think about this. Who are the companies that make these machines and that run them? And these are the kinds of things that I think the general public needs to be more aware of. And I know it would be nice if we could just go vote and that'll be it. But there's so much more that we need to be knowledgeable about. for you, I would love for you to talk a little bit, Stephanie, right now about the media, because we are getting so many cues and miscues from the media. What is their role, and how can we make sure that there is integrity in journalism? I don't expect you to handle that whole thing yourself, but I'm just saying that what suggestions might you have? Because that's a pretty bad problem right now.
Well, it's been evidenced a few ways that I think is worth pointing out. The first one is the media can bolster its integrity by being clear about it is what it is. I mean, the media tends to step around certain things that are obviously improper or racist or immoral, and yet they frame them in very different ways. And so if you're reading just the top of the fold, or you're getting just that soundbite, you don't realize that someone has actually violated the Constitution. You just think they did something that wasn't so nice. And so the media has to do a better job of being much more factual for the public about the information that they're providing. That's traditional media. Social media, a completely different animal. The misinformation and the disinformation out there is really one of the things that made 2016 very difficult. The infiltration by bad actors from outside of the country, posing, for example, as Black organizations, and really building relationships with the Black community, supporting a variety of issues. And then the closer you got to the election, those sites began to change their messaging. And they started talking about, we shouldn't vote. What are they going to do for us? Our vote doesn't matter. Those were not even legitimate Black organizations. So the work that they're doing online is very sophisticated in order to get us to blink. But we've been there, done that before, in terms of people not providing us the information we need to know. And that's why the work that Evan's doing, the work that Eric is doing, is so important for voters to have just a few key pieces of information that they can always fact check against a credible source, against information at the ACLU, information at the Brennan Center, information at PolitiFact, where they can actually determine whether or not what they're hearing is correct. But that's when you've got a lot of time. When you've been standing in line for 8 hours trying to cast your ballot, and something pops up on Twitter and says the machines are broken and they're not going to fix them until tomorrow, and you get out of line, and that's just really fake news. And that's the importance of the role of poll monitors and volunteers who are there working those lines, working with voters to make sure that they're getting real information.
Yes.
So the misinformation and the disinformation is something that voters have to be very cognizant of during this election.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, that is super important. And also just not accepting something at face value and realizing that there is disinformation out there. Eric, along the same lines, it's not just the media, it's also marketers, social influencers. Talk about the impact of those people and how to kind of, navigate through the minefield of disinformation.
Well, in terms of the brands and the social influencers, I mean, I find that the celebrities and social influencers right now are they're not putting out disinformation. In fact, they're all sort of clustered, and this goes for the brands as well, to the same 5 or 10 projects for the most part. And most of it's all get out the vote. And that's fine. I mean, let's say the vote's coming out. It's going to be between 150 and 160 this year, probably million, which the highest we've ever had is 135, I believe. to me, with the brands and the social media influencers and celebrities, it's what comes next more than what's coming for the next 10 days or next 15 days. Because what I find is that everyone is very top focused, and they focus on the same, like I said, 5-10 organizations. But you can dig deeper. I mean, when the social justice, when all the money started flowing, when everything happened around George Floyd, the money went to 10 organizations essentially. But you know what? There's some really, really phenomenal organizations down in the trenches on the streets that are doing unbelievable work, and the work that's going to change these communities, because there's only so much that the biggest organizations can do. So, you know, for example, there's this amazing organization called Leaders Igniting Transformation. It's LIT in Milwaukee. Okay. These are young kids that are there registering other young kids and engaging young, you know, teenagers and college kids in the process. And this isn't new. They've been around for, you know, a number of years now, you know, and I'd love to see them get money because I think they're phenomenal. And there are organizations like that on the street, in the grassroots, in the African-American communities that need to be supported the same way Black Lives Matter needs to be supported. But at a certain point, if you're going to get into it and you're going to step up, and, you know, I know some brand marketers are stuck. You know, they've got bosses and bosses just want the top line. But you know what? If you've got the influence and you really want to step into the game, then step into the game and do it for real.
Yeah, before we have our closing comments from you, I think Yvonne is going to tell us about the next MOBE Monday.
Thank you so much, Pat. For next week's show on October 26th, we have an insightful episode with an assembly of a panel of newspaper archive and advertising thought leaders for an engaging conversation about the transformative state of Black newspapers and advertising in an era of uncertainty. While many count out the Black news industry, we will delve into the historic, current, and future relevancy of this industry and the vitality to communities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Our host is Kevin McFall, and our speakers are Hiram Jackson, Angela Ford, and Melvin Wilson. Back to Pat.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And you can see that, I mean, this addresses some of what you were just talking about, Stephanie and Eric, you know, the necessity to really dig a little bit deeper about these things. I would love to get a closing comments from both of you. And I really want to focus as much as possible on the future, what we're going to do after this election, because as we said earlier, regardless of who wins, the work still needs to be done. And so who wants to go first?
Ladies first.
Thank you. So thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Before I go forward, I just want to say a few quick things about now. Know where you vote. Your polling place is important. Many forms of ID are possible. Don't allow anyone to tell you that it's one form or another. Make sure that you know what ID is required. If you need assistance, if English is not your first language, if you have a disability, you have the right to bring someone in a polling location with you. So know that. You have the right to vote, even if your name isn't found on the voting roll. Do not leave the poll without voting. Even if you have to cast a provisional ballot, do not ever leave empty-handed. Now, to talk about the future. This election, we keep saying it's the most important one of our lives. They're all the most important ones of our lives, especially as a Black woman. My rights are on the ballot every election. If it's the school board, if it's the mayor, the city council, it doesn't matter. These elections are always important because this is where the rules and regulations come from to guide your life. So it is incredibly important that we stay engaged. This is not a midterm or a presidential thing. It's an everyday thing because this is our life and these votes matter. And we have to elect people who are going to write policy and govern the way that we want them to do. The last thing I'll say about the future is that this is an ecosystem. It's not just the transaction of the vote, it's all of the rest of the work that goes into maintaining a democracy. So protest, but be an advocate as well. Make sure you're at those county commission meetings. Make sure you're there when they want to build whatever they want to build in your community that they want to build in someone else's community. Democracy is a participation sport, so stay engaged.
Yeah, you make that point. I know here in California, we've got so many propositions on the ballot. Sometimes I wonder, who are the lawmakers? Is it us? But, to have that opportunity is really great. But there is a responsibility that goes along with that. And I think that voters need to understand that it's not just as simple as showing up on election day. We have homework to do. We need to find out what these issues mean. And a lot of times you have to dig deeply. I know you guys have probably seen some of the kinds of propositions that we have in California. You need to really study them, because sometimes you don't understand what a yes/no vote means as opposed to a no vote. Understanding the issues and how the question is framed, I think, are also very important things. Right, Stephanie?
Yes, absolutely. They purposefully write those ballot initiatives to be confusing.
And it's not as easy sometimes as just following the money. I mean, I think that's part of it, that they make it difficult for you to figure out who these organizations are, because they come up with some really creative names. Sometimes endorsements can help. You look at politicians who you generally agree with and can take their endorsements, but it's got to be more than that, because sometimes they are influenced as well.
That's right.
It's just something to consider. Yeah. Eric, you have some thoughts for us? And I do have a couple more questions if we have time. Go ahead.
Absolutely. First, just to add to what Stephanie said, if you get really confused about certain things in voting, go to your Secretary of State's page, because the Secretary of State's page will have the information that you really need, and it's the state. So for that should really help clarify some things for you. Okay. I am actually, in terms of the future, I am very positive about it because of people like Evan, whose campaign I need to manage. If this guy, he needs to run for office, seriously. But yeah,
I'd vote for him.
Yeah, but so I am very positive about it because of the youth. But there are 3 or 4 things I know I'm personally focusing on with, I work with the Black American Music Association, and there are 4 things that we're definitely going on. 2 are legislative. And the first one is to build on what Stephanie said. Yes, we need to pass those laws about voting rights. But more importantly, we need to have voting as the 8th or 9th constitutional amendment. Okay. Believe it or not, nobody is guaranteed the right to vote in the United States Constitution. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown. Okay. Nobody is guaranteed that right. And that needs to change. So that's one thing that myself and a group of people I know are committed to, and will be building, I hope, what is a very large coalition of lobbyists, organizations, and like-minded people to make that a reality. The second thing, as I said, is it's time to fix the voting machine company issue. And that's on the top of my list, to be quite frank about it, because I have a personal distaste for 3 companies that think that they have the right to control our democracy. Then I think that there has to be an education component, especially in the African-American community, on the entire political system, from the municipal to the state to the federal. And we need to find a way to get it into the schools, and if not into the schools, into the community centers, in the community, and all the way up to the adults, so they understand, to Stephanie's point, what the local elections mean. And in 2022, there's a ton of, in the Confederate states, district attorneys and state judges and sheriff races. And a lot of these places, it's 4 to 8 years. So you want to make the change, the federal government can go and make these big sweeping changes, but everything's enacted on the local level, as we've seen. So I'm actively working on that in terms of the education, but then I'm actively with the people I'm working with going to be getting into the trenches in these African-American communities to flip these races, because there's no reason, this is, if you live in a community, there's no reason that people that aren't really of the community and for the community should be controlling it. And the only reason it's not happening is a lack of education and a lack of understanding of how important it is. So that's what the future, I think, at least I know I'm working on and what I feel is important. But I am, upbeat about it. I really am, because I don't think I've ever seen this in my lifetime from the youth. And I'll tell you what, if there was a fifth thing, I'd love to see the voting age lowered to 16. But
I think that's one of the measures on the ballot here in California, to lower it to 17. If you're going to turn 18 in that year, that's happening. We do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. One from Facebook. How do I make sure that my vote actually counts when the last election and previous ones were stolen?
Well, I think, to Stephanie's point, you can track it. You can track your ballot. Okay. So, and Stephanie, maybe the exact way that it works better than I do, but I know it can be tracked through the county or state websites.
That's correct. And to the extent that someone feels that the election was stolen, the best way to prevent a stolen election is for everyone to vote. And that's why it's so encouraging to see the massive numbers that are being turned in now with voters. Because if you are playing in the margins and you're disenfranchising voters, there's only so much you can do. But when you are voting by the masses, when everyone is out there with their ballot, it's really hard to make all of them fall off the back of the truck.
Right.
So it's really important to believe in yourself and your vote, and that translates to your believing in the system, because it's the only one we have right now.
Yep. Ben, sorry, Stephanie, please continue.
Sure, go.
I was just going to quote, Benny says this all the time. You can steal an election. You cannot steal a landslide.
That's right. And, as Stacey Abrams said, if your vote wasn't important, they wouldn't be working so hard to suppress it. And that is something to really keep in mind. A landslide is not questionable. So, if that happens, that'd be great. I have a YouTube question too. The local post office in my neighborhood is refusing to accept mail-in ballots due to looting concerns. Is that legal? I don't think I've ever heard that.
I would love more information on that specific situation, or I would encourage that person to call 1-866-OUR-VOTE and provide the details. That's 1-866-687-8683, because that is, the post office is not supposed to refuse to accept mail. So it would be very important to know where you're located, which post office it was, and where and how you experience that. That's one of those see something, say something kinds of pieces of information that it is important for us to know, so that the lawyers and others on the back end can research and find out what's happening. So if the YouTube questioner or Facebook questioner would please follow up with 866, or reach out to me directly,
or put it in the app. Put it in the app,
That's right.
Yeah, because I'll have it then, and Stephanie and I are in contact anyway. So yeah, if you
And so
put
you're
it,
talking about csay20.com, right?
yeah, csay2020.com.
2020.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, 2020.
yeah, it's gonna
Yes.
come up and it'll geo target, but that's the strangest thing I've heard yet.
Yeah, I never heard that one before. That's new.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
almost as strange. Yeah, that's
almost as strange as what? One last question. Suggestions, do you have any for assisted living residents to get mail-in ballots in?
it depends on your state. There are some states that if you fill out your ballot, there are others that can return that ballot for you. In Florida, the supervisor of elections will actually send an election official to an assisted living facility, to other kinds of places like that, and actually conduct the opportunity for folks to fill out their ballots and turn those ballots in. So it really depends on the state that you're in.
Yes. And once again, there will be those answers on the Secretary of State for your state's website about that.
Listen, we appreciate the work that both of you are doing in our communities. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us today. And for those of you who are in the audience, we thank you for tuning in. This information will enrich your lives and help you to become much better citizens and help us to be able to have more control over the world in which we live. And I want to thank everyone at MOBE for putting on sessions like these. I hope that everyone will be tuning in next Monday for the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Yvonne.
We thank
Check your
everyone
emails.
so much for joining us, and we want to make sure that our viewers tune in next week as we deal with newspaper, archive, advertising. Is there still an industry for Black newspapers? Talk to you next week. Thank you. Good night.